Škoda has form when it comes to small SUVs, but before the arrival of this Kamiq model, it had never previously delivered us a crossover, the kind of more fashion-led, urban-orientated take on cars of this kind that buyers increasingly seem to want. This super mini-based design sets out to deliver that with a dose of simply clever Škoda sensibility.
What's this? Another small SUV? You could argue that Škoda had a hand in popularising this concept a decade ago with their Yeti model. Today we've got the Kamiq, which aims to distill all the Czech brand's best bits into a compact crossover you could really bond with. Škoda could have been at the forefront of the current craze for supermini-based SUVs, Juke and Captur-class models. Back in 2009, before either of these two cars, it launched a model you might conceivably remember, the Yeti, which used Fabia bits but dressed them up with crossover attitude. It was a good start, but the foundation wasn't built upon. The facelifted Yeti of 2013 was disappointingly conservative in a market seeking high fashion, and after 4 years on sale was allowed to drift out of production without being properly replaced. All of which left the Czech brand to wait until it could launch its own version of the small SUV design possible on the VW Group's MQB A0 platform, a chassis that by autumn 2019 had also been pressed into service for the Seat Arona and the Volkswagen T-Cross in this class. That was when Škoda was able to use it to launch this car, the Kamiq. It's not quite as big as the Yeti was. That's so as to leave space for the next crossover up in Škoda's SUV hierarchy, the Kamiq. But it's slightly larger than the segment leaders amongst super mini-based cars of this kind, the Nissan Juke and the Renault Captur models mentioned earlier. More surprisingly, it's also a fraction longer than its T-Cross and Arona Volkswagen Group cousins, thanks to the longer wheelbase this car borrows from Škoda's Scala family hatch, all of which might help this Kamiq in justifying a slightly higher price point than applies to some of its key rivals. Perhaps. This Škoda does, of course, have other attributes that might draw you to it, though on paper most of them are also shared by Seat Arona and Volkswagen T-Cross cousins. The efficient engines, the practically sized cabin, and the advanced media connectivity. In practice, though, we want to find out whether this little SUV also has an element of its own unique appeal, a reason to make you want a Kamiq rather than one of this car's many segment competitors. So, we're going to put it to the industry's most detailed test. Let's see what it has to offer. We find Škoda's advertising strapline, driven by something different, a touch ironic, as like the company's other models, the Kamiq isn't driven by something different, we mean. Instead, as you'd expect, the engines are much the same as those used in the Volkswagen T-Cross and Seat Arona versions of this little SUV design, and also replicate those used in the Audi Q2. In fact, it's quite hard to think of a car with an engineering CV more widely replicated. As with the models we just mentioned, in terms of the power plant you should pick, the choice for most potential buyers might not be that difficult. You probably don't need either the power or the premium pricing of the top 1.5 litre TSI 150 PS petrol unit. And given the current Enviro zeitgeist, you're unlikely to be considering the single diesel option either, a 1.6 litre TDI with 115 PS. That leaves the 3-cylinder 1 litre TSI petrol unit, which we're trying here in its base 95 PS form. It's an engine which, to be frank, can, in its feeblest form, sometimes rather struggle with the task of hauling nearly 1.3 tonnes of Kamiq about, and one that in 95 PS guys can only be had with a 5-speed gearbox. If for all these different reasons you're left a little underwhelmed by the various power plants just mentioned, you'll be left with one credible engine choice, and fortunately it's a very good one. That 1 litre TSI unit in its more natural, more satisfying 115 PS form, which is offered with 2 strong transmission choices, a 6-speed manual or an optional 7-speed DSG Auto. Almost all Kamiq buyers choose this TSI 115 PS variant, and now you know why. It's difficult to recognise this powertrain as the same engine whose chirpy full-throttle warble brings a grin to your face in the Volkswagen Up GTI. Its oral personality has been dialed down quite a lot for this installation. Plus, of course, it's got 180 kilos more weight to lug about than it's saddled with in and up. The longer ratios chosen for the 6-speed manual gearbox are more geared to cruising than cremating the tyres. And of course, that taller body makes its presence felt if you're minded to start ambitiously pushing on at speed through tighter bends. All of these attributes will of course be welcome to the older buyers who will ignore the Surf Shack marketing and form the largest likely audience for this car. And these people will love the attribute we like most about it, a supple quality of ride that's difficult to better in this class. Yes, it sometimes feels a little on the firm side, and because like virtually every other car in this segment you only get a fairly crude torsion beam rear suspension setup, you certainly feel poorer potholes and more aggressive speed humps. But ordinary tarmac tears and undulations are very effectively smothered in a way that perhaps we should have anticipated. First, because Skoda's almost always very good at supple damping, possibly because the Czech roads are as bad as they are here in Blighty. And second, because the Scala Supermini this car's based upon is a particularly good advertisement for the brand's damping prowess. The company says it's set out to make the Kamiq ride like a much larger car, and sure enough it does. Even larger wheel sizes don't seem to upset it much. As an option, you can specify Sport Chassis Control adaptive suspension, which lowers the car by 15mm and gives you sport and normal damping settings. But we can't see why you'd bother. Like most 3-cylinder turbo engines, this little TSI unit doesn't have much to offer below about 2,000 RPM, so you won't be screaming away from the traffic lights. 62 miles an hour from rest occupies 9.9 seconds en route to 120 miles an hour. Once you get into the mid-range though, and can properly use the 200 Nm torque reserve, it becomes quite a fizzy, eager partner. Or at least it is, unless you dampen its enthusiasm by mating it to the optional 7-speed DSG auto transmission your dealer will want you to consider. As we suggested earlier, you can't have this self-shifter if budgetary considerations force you to have to choose this 1-litre TSI engine in the lesser 95 PS state of tune we're trying here. In this feebler guise, the power plant offers 175 Nm of pulling power, and labours rather more than you'd think from the quoted stats, which suggest it will manage the 62 mile an hour sprint in 11.1 seconds on the way to 112 miles an hour. For pulling power, what you need is the 250 Nm torque figure that's on offer in this car from the two alternative 4-cylinder engines we mentioned at the beginning of this section, both offered with either 6-speed manual or 7-speed DSG auto transmission. To remind you, there's the 1.6 TDI 115 PS diesel, which makes 62 miles an hour in 10.2 seconds en route to 119, and the 1.5 TSI petrol unit, which, as you might expect, given its 150 PS output, improves these figures by quite a lot, to 8.3 seconds and 132 miles an hour. To the extent when pushing on in damper conditions in that top petrol Kamiq, you'll frequently feel the traction control battling to manage the onset of wheel spin. And thanks to their slightly higher 1,250 kilo braked towing capacity, these engines will be the ones suitable for Kamiq owners who might, for instance, want to pull along a small caravan. But this really isn't the kind of SUV you'd buy to tow stuff about, nor, like its class contemporaries, is it a car you'd buy if keen driving was on your agenda. Though, just in case, Skoda offers an optional drive mode select system that allows you to tweak throttle response and steering feel via Eco, Normal, Sport and individual settings. This instead is a little crossover perfectly suited for driving in the real world. For the moment you start off down the road in one, you instantly feel comfortable with the way it feels and responds. All the control weights are nicely matched, the clutch engages smoothly, the throttle response is linear, the brakes inspire confidence and the steering is light and precise, even if it offers relatively little in the way of actual feedback. During fast, tight cornering, having a slightly higher centre of gravity than you get in the brand's conventional small Fabia and Scala hatchbacks is noticeable, but even then, the Kamiq doesn't lurch about and feels relatively agile. And for the rest of the time, you'll simply enjoy the fact that the fractionally higher set driving position gives you a useful improvement in all-round visibility. So it's good around town and equally good out on the highway, helped by that supple ride and standards of drive refinement that are difficult to better in this class. This car's better suited to longer trips than most of its rivals. The Kamiq is, though, at heart, as Skoda keeps telling us, an urban crossover. It certainly isn't intended for much use away from a paved surface, though muddy car parks will be slightly easier to tackle than they would be in a Scala because this car sits 39mm further off the ground. The 188mm ride height might even make light field tracks passable without damage, especially if you add in the optional rough road package, which includes a front underbody guard and stone guard. Those tracks will, though, need to be generally dry because this car won't help you out with any kind of additional traction. Four-wheel drive is fairly irrelevant in this class, but it would have been useful perhaps if Skoda had looked into adding the kind of enhanced traction system that some rivals offer to provide a bit of extra slippery surface grip when needed. Not much else, though, has been overlooked in the creation of this car. It offers a dose of fashion and a slice of sense all rolled into one. Czech, mate? We can see why you might think so. The motor industry likes to think that customer preference for small, tall models like this one is a recent phenomenon. Actually, it isn't. Cars like the Renault 4 were offering this kind of packaging back in the 70s, though admittedly not with the kind of urban crossover vibe that characterises the Kamiq and its ilk. It'll be interesting to see how Skoda's interpretation of that is received by customers in the small SUV segment. The styling here is derived from the Vision X concept car the company unveiled at the 2018 Geneva Motor Show, but also draws heavily on the aesthetic already established by the brand's other larger crossover models, thanks to its split-level front lighting strips and prominent front bonnet bulge. Head of design, Oliver Stefani, particularly likes this front end, which features these interesting cross-hatched daytime running lights above headlamps with LED beams, technology that's usually optional in this segment. As with this model's larger Karoq and Kodiaq showroom stablemates, there's an upright radiator grille with double slats, plus a sculpted bonnet that features a raised centre section running down its entire length. And along with the rest of the industry, Skoda seems to think that adding a silver plastic strip below the lower air intake will add a more rugged feel to this kind of crossover. Let's move to the side. Now, roof rails are fitted as standard, which is just as well as without them. You might struggle to even recognise this as any kind of SUV. The brand points out that this car rides 39mm higher than the Skoda Scala family hatch it's based upon. Its total ride height of 188mm is actually one of the highest in the segment, but there's no body cladding or wheel arch protection to draw your attention to the fact. And for the time being, the Czech maker has also ignored the class trend towards optional contrasting colour roof finishing. Though if you add in the optional panoramic glass roof, it'll look as if the top of the car is contrast coloured. Wheel rim sizes vary between 16 and 18 inches. We've got a set of rather fetching 17-inch Propus Aero alloys here. At the rear, the light clusters feature a fresh interpretation of the Skoda typical C-shape and neatly form a junction between the side and rear body surfaces. Part LED illumination is standard with an optional high functionality rear LED light option also available, which includes Audi-like scrolling dynamic indicators. A neat roof spoiler embellishes the top of the rear screen, and as with the company's other recent models, the usual tailgate brand badge is instead replaced by spaced lettering. Down below, a rear diffuser is neatly integrated into the lower section of the rear bumper and finished in either platin grey or black. As usual, what's more important is the stuff you can't see. Yes, this Skoda shares the same MQB A0 platform that you'll find underpinning its Volkswagen T-Cross and Seat Arona segment cousins, but in this case it's been stretched by quite a lot. The wheelbase of this platform is 100mm longer than it is in a T-Cross, for instance, which is why this Kamiq takes up 133mm more pavement space than that car. In fact, this Kamiq's body is longer than just about any other small SUV you might care to name, 19mm longer than a Renault Captur and 31mm lengthier than a Nissan Juke. Now, what sort of difference will that make inside? Well, time to find out. And as you get in, you notice an elevated hip point, which makes this car feel bigger than the small hatch it's based upon. But once inside, the elevated driving position this kind of design feature usually promises rather fails to materialise. Actually, it feels much more like Skoda's more conventional model at this price point, the Scala family hatch, though the Czech brand insists that you're seating 40mm higher than you would be in one of those. Most of the cabin design and architecture is shared with the Scala too, which will disappoint the Nissan Juke fashionistas who will find it a shade on the bland side. Quite a few other potential buyers, though, will appreciate the exemplary ergonomics and the fact that there's segment-leading build quality. There's less scratchy plastic and more soft touch finishing too, not only compared to, say, a Juke or a Renault Captur, but also in comparison to this car's Volkswagen T-Cross and Seat Arona VW Group staplemates. This is, in almost every sense, a more grown-up kind of small SUV. So, less hip and more hip replacement? Well, that's perhaps a bit cruel. The conservative ambience chosen here does, after all, accurately reflect the fact that the majority of Kamiq buyers are more likely to be using this car for a trip to the garden centre than their local surf shack. We still think, though, that a good proportion of these people are folk who might have hoped that the switch to the SUV genre would have given the designers of this car a little more licence to fashionably embellish the standard Skoda cabin template. You'll certainly need this optional mid-level fascia silver haptic decorative insert if the cabin isn't to look almost unremittingly dark and grey. Fortunately, there are technology-led distractions that lift the atmosphere and fit with the quality ambience. To suit the modern zeitgeist, there has to be a huge freestanding fascia-mounted infotainment screen, and sure enough, you get that here. This appendage will only be of the shiny glass-fronted touchscreen type if you've avoided baseline trim, which gets a cruder, non-touchable 6.5-inch swing display. But almost all Kamiq buyers will do that, in which case they'll usually be facing the mid-level 8-inch Bolero spec unit with its SmartLink, Apple CarPlay and Android Auto smartphone mirroring functionality. Pay more or specify top spec trim and you can get this centre screen upgraded to the 9.2-inch Amundsen package we have here, the largest display in the segment. It incorporates 3D navigation, a 64GB hard drive, gesture control activation, an optional Wi-Fi hotspot and a digital assistant that Skoda calls Laura, which claims to be able to understand natural speech. We found it a bit hit and miss, but when it works, it's brilliant. There's also a built-in eSIM, so your Kamiq can be always online, which opens up all kinds of extra functionality for the brand's Skoda Connect app. Features like online route calculation and map updates, plus information on traffic, news, weather, and the local availability of fuel stations and parking spaces. Another screen that's standard at the top of the range and optional in the mid part of the lineup is the virtual cockpit digital dash that replaces the usual conventional dials in the instrument cluster. As you can see, our test car features it. At 10.25 inches, the TFT monitor used here is one of the largest in the segment, and thanks to borrowed Audi technology, it's one of the better digital displays out there. Clicking on this steering wheel view button, you can change between twin or single virtual dials. Plus there's an option with digital readings on range and speed, or an expanded centre section with or without flanking tabs. This latter layout can be customised into an extended format to show a full width navigation map. When two virtual dials are shown, the classic option, information within them can be tailored via a whole series of choices accessible via a setup menu offered within the settings of the centre dash display. And depending on how you choose to set up the virtual cockpit display, you can get the gauges showing range, distance info, a compass, altitude, audio, acceleration info, consumption, driving distance, travelling time, or route guidance data. It's really neat. Enough on media stuff. What else do you need to know about this cabin? Well, perhaps the fact that it includes the usual complement of what Skoda calls its simply clever features, little touches that other manufacturers don't bother with, that this Czech maker thinks will make everyday life with this car just that little bit easier. Things like the little pockets in the side of the seats, grippy cup holders so you can undo a bottle top with one hand, and a clip on the windscreen A-pillar for your parking ticket. Avoid entry-level trim, and you also get stowage compartments beneath the front chairs. And our favourite touch, a pull-out umbrella built into the driver's door, an idea borrowed from Rolls-Royce. None of which would really matter much if cabin ergonomics hadn't been spot on, but modern Skodas don't tend to get that kind of thing wrong these days, and this one certainly hasn't. It's easy to get a really comfortable driving position thanks to plenty of seat and wheel adjustment, and lumbar support is standard, providing you avoid base level trim. This, along with supportive upholstery shaping, means a greater level of long distance comfort than you might expect from a car of this size. All-round visibility is also pretty good thanks to slim front windscreen pillars, and courtesy of the large glass house, your over-the-shoulder view is much better than it is on most small SUVs of this sort, which you'll be pleased about if you're stuck with base trim on this car, because at that level in the range you don't get standard rear parking sensors. Earlier we touched on cabin storage. Aside from the simply clever features we mentioned then, this car also gets the basics right here with a total 26 litres of stowage space, more than you'll find in any other cabin in this class. The door bins are big, can take 1.5 litre bottles and have extra spaces for high-vis vests. The glove box, which incorporates credit card and coin holders, is decently sized too, though it's only cooled with top spec trim. The twin cup holders we mentioned earlier are provided by the frankly conventional handbrake with a 12-volt socket nearby, and there's a useful compartment by the driver's knee. A further ticket clip is revealed on the driver's sun visor, and you get a large open stowage area in front of the gear stick, which is presumably where you're supposed to charge your phone, since a couple of USB sockets are provided nearby. Unfortunately, they're USB-C ports, which means you might have to buy an adapter to use them. It's a pity Skoda couldn't have provided one of each kind. It's also a pity that there are no further ports in this deep box between the seats that would enable you to charge your handset out of sight of prying eyes. Avoid entry-level trim, and you get overhead storage for your sunglasses too. Time to take a look in the back, and this, we're told, is where that lengthy wheelbase we referenced earlier should really pay off. So let's see. That's broadly how it plays out too. The knee room figure of 73mm is one of the best in the segment, and there's a relatively generous 1439mm of elbow room too. The headroom figure, 1003mm, is also near the top of the class, so 6-foot adults who might normally grumble at the prospect of long-distance rear seat confinement in any super mini-based model need have no worries about the prospect of riding in this one. There'd better be only 2 of them though. Most models in this class would struggle to accommodate 3 rear-seated folk above school age, but in this one that would be even more difficult thanks to this prominent high centre transmission tunnel, the kind of thing you'd think you wouldn't need in an exclusively front-driven car. On the plus side, we appreciate the theatre-style seating design, which sees those in the back of this car perched around 50mm higher than those at the front, so as to provide a better view of the road ahead. Don't underestimate the importance of that kind of thing to your travelling offspring, who will additionally value that large, wide glass area we mentioned earlier, designed to reduce the likelihood of travel sickness. If you've phone-obsessed teenagers to ferry about, you can also specify a couple of twin USB ports back here. What's more disappointing is that none of the rear seat flexibility that used to feature on this model's predecessor, the old Skoda Yeti, has been carried over to a Kamiq. With that car, the rear bench reclined, slid back and forth, and could even be removed completely. And there's none of that here. We'd at least have expected a seat sliding function, given that this car's Volkswagen T-Cross VW Group cousin offers it. But no. Still, at least the sensible stuff is covered off, or mostly anyway. You have to pay extra for a rear seat armrest and USB-C sockets for the rear cabin, but that's to be expected in this class of car. As standard, you do get very decently sized door bins, overhead coat hooks and reading lights, plus Isofix mounting points for the two outer seating positions. There are also seat back pockets, which you can't always take for granted that you'll get in this class of car. Most Seat Arona variants don't provide them, for instance. An optional family pack gives you fold-out rear seat tables and waste bins in the door panels too. As we head back to the tailgate, we'll reference an option we'd want, these neat door edge protectors, which spring out as you open up to protect both the door and adjacently parked vehicles. That's yet another of this car's simply clever features, and you find them in the most unlikely places in this car. Under the bonnet, for instance, there's an integrated funnel in the lid of the windscreen washer tank, and we'll pause on the way to the boot to notice another neat touch, this ice scraper built into the fuel filler cap. It even has an integrated tyre tread depth gauge. Raising the rear hatch can be a powered operation if you pay extra, in which case you get a useful tip to close function, but you don't really need it because the tailgate isn't particularly heavy. Once the rear hatch is raised, you'll find yourself looking at a 400-litre boot area you could argue is class-leading. Yes, with a Nissan Juke or a Renault Captur, you can get 20 litres or so more, but this area is arguably squarer and more usable. A Volkswagen T-Cross can only rival it for size if you push its bench so far forward that there'd be very little rear legroom. And as we'll see in a moment, none of the cars we just mentioned can get close to this Skoda's seat-down capacity. We'll get to that after we've touched on a few practical touches here, like the useful pull-down handle on the inside of the tailgate and the neat pull-out LED torch that comes as standard, providing you avoid entry-level trim. The Kamiq also sets a record in our experience when it comes to the provision of bag hooks. There are 2 on each side, plus 2 more larger ones sticking out on the seat backs. Now, it's disappointing that you have to pay extra for an adjustable height boot floor. That's why we don't have it on this test car, but it doesn't cost much more and you can probably negotiate it into your deal. We'd want the optional double-sided boot floor too, with a wipe-clean surface you can turn over onto for the carriage of muddy boots or muddy dogs. Another thing you might want that we do have here is the optional boot pack, which gives you a 12-volt socket back here, plus a luggage net on the underside of the parcel shelf, along with mounting fixtures in the boot area and a cargo net you can attach to the provided 4 tie-down points to stop small items rolling around as you drive. That latter feature sits in a pouch built into this useful netting attachment situated on the left of the cargo area, while on the right is an arm behind which you could put small items. Under the boot floor is a bit of extra space, but only if you're unwise enough not to pay the extra Skoda wants for this space-saver spare wheel we have here. Unfortunately, you won't be able to take lengthier items without disturbing rear seat passengers because there's no option for a ski hatch or a 40-20-40 seat back split. But once you flatten the 60-40 split backrest, a large 1,395 litre capacity is revealed. To give you some class perspective, that's 114 litres more than you get from a Volkswagen T-Cross, 120 litres more than you get from a Renault Captur, and a massive 307 litres more than you'd get in a Nissan Juke. In short, once again, we've a Škoda leading its class when it comes to cargo area practicality. Kamiq pricing from launch kicked off at around £17,700 and ranged up to around £26,000 across 4 core trim levels: SSE, which is what we have here, SEL and Monte Carlo. Every model available is front driven. Around half of all sales will be to private buyers. As you'll have seen if you viewed other sections of this film, there's a choice of 4 engines. Most will opt for either of the 2 1-litre TSI 3-cylinder petrol units. There's a choice of 95 or 115 PS outputs. The base 95 PS version has to be had with 5-speed manual transmission, but the faster variant offers a choice of either a 6-speed manual or, for £1,250 more, a 7-speed DSG Auto. The same transmission choice also applies to the 2 alternative 4-cylinder engine options, a 150 PS 1.5 TSI petrol and 115 PS 1.6 TDI diesel, but think in terms of a £22,000 starting budget if you want either of these. If you want the freedom to be able to select between all 4 of the engines we've just mentioned, you'll need to be looking at the mid-range SE or SEL models. Below or above these levels, things get a bit more restrictive. The base S variant only comes with the 1-litre TSI 95 PS petrol engine, and with top Monte Carlo trim, you're limited to the 2 faster petrol units. Since essentially this is an SUV version of Škoda's Scala small hatchback, it's relevant to consider the Kamiq price premium over that car. Think in terms of around £750 to £1,000, depending on the engine and trim level you're looking at. No wonder the mainstream brands are piling into this segment. As for the price difference between this car and the next SUV up in Škoda's range, the Kamiq, well, think in terms of a Kamiq costing you just over £2,200 more than an equivalently engined Kamiq. On to the value proposition offered by Kamiq pricing in the small SUV segment. Well, as usual, for proper comparisons, you'll need to be comparing apples with apples by looking at B-segment supermini-based SUVs rather than the C-segment family hatchback-based crossovers that Škoda targets with that larger Kamiq model. In other words, if it makes more sense, cars in the Nissan Juke segment rather than the Nissan Qashqai class. Having mentioned the Juke, we'll start our comparisons there and also consider the rival model whose engineering that Nissan shares, Renault's Captur. In both cases, the range entry-level figure seems fractionally lower than it is for this Škoda, but if in your Juke or Captur you want an engine that's reasonably comparable in price and performance to the 115 PS 1-litre TSI unit that most will choose in a Kamiq, then you'll find that the pricing against this Škoda will be much more comparable. You could get exactly that 1-litre TSI engine if in this class you chose either of this Kamiq model's 2 direct VW Group cousins, the Seat Arona and the Volkswagen T-Cross. There's not much of a price difference between these 3 cars, which could well lead you to prefer this Škoda given its extra simply clever interior features and the fact that its slightly longer wheelbase means fractionally more interior space. If you happen to be wanting the diesel variant, this Škoda is definitely a better bet because its 115 PS TDI unit is cheaper in a Kamiq than it is in an Arona and in a similarly priced T-Cross. The same engine only develops 95 PS. As for other key rivals, well, most comparably equipped versions of the Ford EcoSport cost about the same as a Kamiq, but the EcoSport is smaller inside and isn't as good to drive as this Škoda. A small Ford crossover you might be more likely to be considering in this segment is the Blue Oval brand's Puma model, but that car's extra mild hybrid tech saddles it with a price point that's around £1,000 more than it is for an equivalent Kamiq. Comparably priced Korean contenders in this segment, the Kia Stonic and the Hyundai Kona, struggle to match this Škoda's practicality and drive dynamics. Suzuki's Vitara and Mitsubishi's ASX feel slightly better in this regard, but they won't save you much in their most mainstream comparable guises. You might be more taken with the various PSA group models plying their trade in this sector. The Peugeot 2008, the Citroën C3 Aircross, or the Vauxhall Crossland X. Now, volume versions of the Peugeot and the Vauxhall, which also both cost about the same as this Skoda, can be rather bland. But the spacious Citroën C3 Aircross is tempting, and would be more so if it was better built and its looks were of less of an acquired taste. Base versions of that Citroën can look attractively priced, but again, if you match apples with apples, say matching a mid-level spec petrol C3 Aircross model with an SE spec Kamiq 1 litre TSI 95 PS variants like this one, then you'll find that the French model's price advantage becomes pretty negligible. Fiat's contender, the 500X, will also cost you more if you reject it in its slow, inefficient base 1.6 litre petrol form and instead choose an engine more comparable with the performance and frugality you get with Volkswagen's TSI technology. And you could easily find yourself paying in the region of around £1,500 more than this Czech brand is asking here if you were to go for comparable versions of segment rivals like Vauxhall's Mokka X, Jeep's Renegade, Suzuki's SX4 S-Cross, or Mazda's CX-30. Of course, there are cheaper small SUVs in this class from the real bargain brands that would save you decent money over a Kamiq. SsangYong's Tivoli, for example, which could save you up to around £3,000 or more, though that price gap would be much reduced if you equipped a Tivoli to the level of this Skoda. And much of the price difference that then remained would be eroded over the duration of your ownership period by the SsangYong's higher running costs and lower residuals. Broaden the scope of your search and you could even theoretically get yourself a comparable car of this kind in the really affordable £12,000 to £14,000 bracket if you went for an MG ZS, iffy build quality, a Suzuki Ignis, too small for family use, or a Dacia Duster, a much clunkier proposition for urban driving. But let's get to the bottom line here, which is that whatever you pitch against it, the value proposition of this Skoda will probably end up looking pretty strong, especially once you've taken its strong, likely residual value performance into account. If, having considered all of this, you conclude that it is a Kamiq that you really want, then you're going to need to know just how generous Skoda's been when it comes to standard specification. Well, the answer is that there'll probably be more included than you might expect, though it seems a bit mean to make base spec variants do without basic fundamentals like an alarm and a remote plipper for the central locking. Unfortunately, you've got to progress further up the range for those. Otherwise though, most of what you'd really need is included, even on the humblest S-spec model. Now this entry variant comes with 16-inch caster alloy wheels, roof rails and headlights with limited basic spec LED functionality. Plus, there's air conditioning including a pollen filter, a leather covered steering wheel, a trip computer and an electronic differential lock or XDS Plus feature that improves front wheel traction. There's also a decent tally of safety kit, and we'll talk you through that in a minute. Unlike in the cheapest Volkswagen T-Cross, the centre dash infotainment screen isn't 8 inches in size, and the audio system's more basic too. In an S-spec Kamiq, there's a simpler 6.5-inch swing setup with a 4-speaker audio system, but you do still get Bluetooth phone connectivity, plus a couple of USB-C connection points. Also standard across the range is use of this Czech brand's clever, freely downloadable Škoda Connect app. This allows you to remotely lock or unlock your Kamiq from wherever you are, and if you've forgotten where you parked it, it'll give you area notification. And if having got that, you still can't find your car in a crowded car park, the Connect app will allow you to remotely activate either the alarm, the headlights, or the horn. It'll also give you a vehicle health report, help you reschedule servicing, and give you various elements of extra driving data. So, all of that comes with base trim. And as we said earlier though, most Kamiq customers buy in at this mid-range SE trim level, not only because of the wider choice of engines, but also because you have to stretch at least to this level to get the chance to pay extra for most of the more important things on the options list. You'll also need SE trim if you want the kind of classy, glass-fronted, smartphone-friendly touchscreen infotainment provision you get in every version of that rival Volkswagen T-Cross model we just mentioned, provided here by the brand's 8-inch Bolero centre dash display. This includes an upgraded 8-speaker audio system and the Czech brand's SmartLink smartphone mirroring system with its Apple CarPlay and Android Auto MirrorLink compatibility. SE trim also gives you near essentials like an alarm, rear parking sensors, auto headlamps and wipers, front fog lamps, cruise control and an auto dimming rear view mirror. You also get smarter Braga style 17-inch alloy wheels, body coloured bumpers and high beam control for the headlamps, as well as a more smartly trimmed cabin lifted by the addition of silver trimming for the cloth upholstery, a multi-function steering wheel, a front central armrest. Practical extra touches at this level in the range include storage compartments under the front seats, a sunglasses compartment in the roof liner, reading lights, front seat lumbar support, an illuminated vanity mirror for the front seat passenger, a 12-volt socket and a removable LED torch in the boot, and even an umbrella built into the driver's door. Want more? Then find the extra for SEL spec model, which will be recognisable by its larger 18-inch Krator style alloy wheels and its chrome finishing for the window surrounds and the roof rails. Inside an SEL variant, there's extra silver and gloss black interior trim and seats part trimmed with micro suede black upholstery. In this case, these items are also embellished by features that you may have grown used to having in larger cars, things like dual zone climate control, 10.25-inch virtual cockpit digital instrument dial display, power folding mirrors and an engine start-stop button. Other SEL features include privacy glass, high functionality LED rear lights with scrolling indicators, a cooled glove box, floor mats and full LED rear lights with a scrolling function. You also get a big car standard of infotainment provision, courtesy of Skoda's top Amundsen spec 9.2-inch infotainment screen, which has a built-in eSIM that enables the Kamiq to be always online, establishing a high-speed LTE internet connection. The Amundsen system also includes voice control in the form of Skoda's digital assistant LoRa setup, which can respond to common commands. And you also get 3D navigation, a 64GB hard drive, gesture control activation, and the opportunity to add an optional Wi-Fi hotspot. Integrated Wi-Fi allows you to make a lot more use of that Škoda Connect app we mentioned earlier, and specifically its Wi-Fi enabled infotainment online package, a year's free use of which is included after purchase from this point on in the range. Once you've put in a sat-nav destination, Infotainment Online will brief you about things like petrol stations, parking places and points of interest along your route, as well as updating you on the latest news and weather. So there you have it. SEL spec gives you pretty much everything you really need in this Skoda. Still, there'll surely be customers seduced by the big car feel who want more, and for them the really desirable top Monte Carlo variant beckons. On top of everything you get with SEL spec, equipment highlights here include 18-inch black Vega wheels and a panoramic glass roof that also gives the top of the car a contrast colour look. You also get full LED headlamps that adapt to the road and feature fog lights with a cornering function and dynamic scrolling indicators. Inside, there's white ambient lighting and grippy sports seats with red trim, plus a sports steering wheel with red stitching and perforated leather. Right, enough with standard spec. Let's now move on to the part of this film where we talk you through the various extra cost elements you may want to consider adding to the Kamiq trim level you've chosen. Let's start with a few relatively affordable boxes we think you might want to tick. There's the variable height boot floor, which really should be standard. And you're going to need the space saver spare wheel, and on S and SE models, the textile floor mats too. Across the range, you might well additionally want the boot pack, which gives you a 12-volt socket in the luggage area, netting on the bottom of the parcel shelf, and a cargo net for the floor. The flip-out door edge protectors would be useful to have too, and they come with either the family pack, which also gives you a double-sided boot floor and leatherette protection for the backs of the front seats, or they come as part of the Simply Clever pack, which also gives you drawers under the front seats and a 12-volt socket in the boot. What about driver stuff? Well, an optional drive mode select system that allows you to tweak throttle response and steering feel via eco, normal, sport and individual settings. Drive mode select comes included with the sport chassis control adaptive damping package, which gives you normal and sport damper setting options and lowers the suspension by 15 millimeters. The optional ACC, or adaptive cruise control setup, adapts to highway traffic flow, and when paired with the DSG auto gearbox, can bring your Kamiq to a stop and have it pull away automatically within up to 3 seconds. To help with slotting your Kamiq into tight spaces, you can add in a rear view camera, front parking sensors and a park assist system that'll steer the car into your chosen bay for you. In the unlikely event that you'll be using this Skoda on forest trails, you'll want the optional rough road package, which includes a front underbody guard and stone guard. What else? Well, you can specify a couple of USB-C ports for the rear. Child passengers will thank you for that. There's dual zone climate control available if your chosen Kamiq trim level doesn't have that. And if you choose this, you can also pay extra for a heated windscreen, a boon on icy mornings. If you can ignore the draw of a heated windscreen, your dealer will be able to offer you the winter pack, which gives you heated front and outer rear seats and heated windscreen washer nozzles. Bear in mind that, as was suggested by our spec observations earlier, you'll have to pay extra if you go for a base-trimmed S model, but still want essentials like rear parking sensors and the 8-inch Bolero centre dash screen with its smartphone mirroring functionality. On a mid-range SE model like this one, you'll need to pay extra to get the virtual cockpit instrument binnacle dial display and the larger 9.2-inch Amundsen centre dash screen with its extra functionality. What about a few niceties? Well, providing you can avoid entry-level trim, you can specify a powered tailgate, a panoramic glass roof, a heated steering wheel, and electrically adjustable driver seat, keyless entry, and a wireless charging mat for your phone. There's a 10-speaker Skoda sound system, and you can add in a rear centre armrest and an interior pack which gives you fold-out tables on the front seat backs and a bin that slots within the rear door bins. You might want to upgrade the headlights to full LED functionality, which, as mentioned earlier, means that they'll adapt to the road and feature fog lights with a cornering function and dynamic scrolling indicators. On an SE model, you can add high functionality rear LED lights with scrolling indicators, privacy glass and power folding mirrors too. On to aesthetics. Now, bear in mind that unless you choose your Kamiq in solid energy blue, you're going to need to pay your dealer extra for your choice of paint shade. And there are two special colours, Candy White and Meteor Grey, various metallic and pearl effect colours. We've got Titan Blue Metallic here. And if you're happy to pay even more, there are some top exclusive colours, Velvet Red and Crystal Black. Skoda also offers various different 16, 17 and 18-inch wheel designs if you don't like the ones fitted to your chosen trim level. We've got an optional set of 17-inch Propus Aero alloy rims fitted here, for example. We'd also suggest that you might want to do something about the cabin's rather dark, subdued ambience. The 9.2-inch Amundsen centre screen package comes complete with a silver haptic decorative strip for the fascia. That trimming strip can also be had in what Skoda calls a Tabora finish. Both kinds of decorative strip come included with the ambient lighting packages, which are available in white, copper or red. And you get the silver haptic decorative strip included if you go for the leather and micro suede upholstery trimming package. On to practicalities. Now, make up your mind about a tow bar at the outset, because it won't be possible for your dealer to retrospectively fit one once your Kamiq has left the factory. There's a tow bar preparation package or an electrically folding tow bar that slots neatly out of the way when not in use. Now, we mentioned the double-sided boot floor earlier. That's available as a standalone option. And you can also add a net partition, a plastic boot dish, an all-weather boot mat, a rear bumper protective foil, and a protection pack, which gives you mud flaps, as well as the floor mats and the double-sided boot liner we mentioned earlier. Roof racks available, as are aluminium roof bars, and Skoda offers 380-litre roof boxes in silver, black or white that can take up to 120 kilograms. If you specify the tow bar, you can add a bicycle carrier to it that can take a couple of cycles. There's also a dash cam and a smoker's pack if you haven't yet kicked the habit. On to safety. Now, standard on all Kamiqs is a front assist system that on the open road scans the road ahead as you drive for potential accident hazards, warning you if one's detected and automatically braking if necessary. And you get that same kind of functionality at urban speeds too, as part of a city emergency brake system included as part of the front assist package. This setup also includes predictive pedestrian protection that specifically searches for pedestrians who might be about to step out in front of you, and if necessary can initiate braking to avoid them. There's also a lane assist feature which alerts you if you drift out of your lane on the highway. Plus, the Škoda Connect app we mentioned earlier includes an emergency call e-call feature that will alert the rescue services with your exact GPS location if you have an accident and the airbags go off. All Kamiqs also get twin front, side and curtain airbags, Isofix child seat fastenings, a tyre pressure monitoring system and anti-whiplash front head restraints. On top of this, there are the usual electronic systems to try and ensure that neither of these features will ever be needed. That means ESC stability control and an ASR traction control system. There's ABS braking, of course, a hill hold control feature stops you from drifting backwards on uphill junctions, and panic stops will be advertised to following motorists by automatically activating hazard warning lights. If you want more, then providing you avoid entry-level trim, you'll be able to specify a driver fatigue sensor that monitors your reactions for drowsiness, prompting you to stop for a restorative coffee if lethargy is detected. And high beam control, which can dip your headlights for you automatically at night in the face of oncoming traffic. On SE and Monte Carlo models, you can also pay extra for the optional side assist blind spot detection package, which alerts you if you're about to dangerously pull out in front of another vehicle. And this also includes rear traffic alert, which warns you about oncoming traffic when you're reversing out of a space. It's also worth mentioning that all Kamiqs fitted with the top Amundsen infotainment system get traffic sign recognition, which pictures speed signs as you pass them and displays them on the centre dash screen. You can pay extra for a driver's knee airbag, and that feature is also included as part of the Crew Protect Assist pack, which additionally gives you rear side airbags and a feature that senses when an impact is imminent, then braces the car to better withstand it by instantly closing the windows. It's all very reassuring. If you're wondering about switching into a small SUV from a super mini or maybe a small family hatch, you might be a touch concerned about increased running costs, with good reason. Not long ago, there was quite a significant gap between the fuel and CO2 readings of a little crossover and the super mini it would inevitably be based upon. This was mainly down to excess weight, the kind of thing you still find with older designs in this segment. A Vauxhall Mokka X, for instance, weighs nearly 1.5 tons, about 350 kilos more than the level at which a decently engineered small hatch tips the scales these days. There's nothing like that here, of course, with this Kamiq, nor would you expect there to be given the delay there's been in Skoda properly entering this profitable class. A Kamiq, though boxier and so a bit less aerodynamic than a Scala small hatch it's based upon, actually weighs fractionally less than that car, which explains why the fuel returns of this small SUV's Euro 16 temp engines are very little different from those of a Scala. For the purposes of illustration, let's take the 95 PS 1 litre TSI petrol Kamiq we're trying here, which manages a WLTP combined cycle fuel return of 49.6 mpg and an NEDC rated CO2 reading of 116 grams per kilometre. For the equivalent Scala 95 PS model, the figures are 50.4 mpg and 114 grams per kilometre. So you get the idea. The 115 PS version of this 1 litre TSI engine that most Kamiq buyers will choose improves that CO2 reading to 113 grams per kilometre with manual transmission and further to 111 grams per kilometre with a DSG auto gearbox. The respective fuel readings for a 1 litre TSI 115 PS model are up to 48.7 mpg for the manual and up to 46.3 mpg for the auto. These are very class competitive readings. To give you just a taste of segment perspective, we'll tell you that a rival Renault Captur TCE 100 is slightly thirstier and dirtier than a Kamiq 1 litre TSI 115 PS, despite the fact that the French contender has 15 PS less power. This kind of showing has been achieved through the clever design of the 3-cylinder TSI unit. In the unlikely event that you're interested in the engineering tech, we'll tell you that this is down to innovations like this unit's special 5-hole piezoelectric injector, specially designed pistons, and a cutting-edge after-treatment system that works with a 4-way catalytic converter and an integrated petrol particulate filter that reduces particulate emissions by 95%. Mind you, the Kamiq's alternative 4-cylinder petrol engine has its share of efficient innovation too, which is why the running cost penalty for switching to the 1.5 litre 150 PS unit is quite minor. In fact, a manual gearbox Kamiq 1.5 TSI variant is actually cleaner than any of the 3-cylinder 1 litre models, managing an NEDC rated 110 grams per kilometre of CO2 to sit alongside a WLTP combined cycle fuel figure of up to 47.9 mpg. Choose this engine with DSG auto transmission and the respective figures are 115 grams per kilometre and up to 44.8 mpg. This is all thanks to the clever cylinder deactivation technology that features with this power plant and deactivates 2 of its 4 cylinders under light to medium throttle loads. Skoda doesn't have any plans to follow obvious rivals in offering any kind of electrified powertrain technology in this segment, but for those buyers obsessed with lowering their running cost returns, it does make available a diesel engine in this car. The 115 PS 1.6 litre TDI unit in question can't manage a huge improvement in the officially quoted stats over its petrol counterpart, but our experience suggests that its readings might be rather easier to achieve in the real world thanks to extra torque that means you don't have to thrash the engine about so much. For a manual Kamiq TDI, you're looking at up to 56.5 mpg on the WLTP rated combined cycle, while for the DSG Auto it's up to 53.3 mpg. With both transmissions, the CO2 figure is 112 grams per kilometre. The TDI power plant gets a selective catalytic reduction filter to cut down on nitrous oxide and, like most modern diesels, uses a urea-based solution called AdBlue that's injected into the exhaust gas stream to help clean up emissions. All the engines are aided by the brand's stop-start and brake energy regeneration systems, and if your Kamiq has DSG automatic transmission, it'll also offer a coasting function that, at cruising speeds, will disconnect the gearbox from the powertrain, leaving the engine to idle until you next lead it. Another financial burden you'll want to plan around is insurance, though the Kamiq helps here by sitting in lower groups than some of its direct rivals. You're looking at Group 8E or 9E for this 1 litre TSI 95 PS model, and Group 11E or 12E if you want either of the 115 PS models, the 1 litre TSI with this higher output or the 1.6 TDI diesel. The top 1.5 TSI petrol model is rated at Group 17E. We'll also mention that depreciation levels are very class competitive. Independent experts reckon that the predicted residual value for a typical Kamiq 1 litre TSI 115 PS SE manual model after 3 years and 10,000 miles would be 48%. That's only fractionally less than you'd get from this car's Volkswagen T-Cross cousin. And maintenance? Well, the intervals are the same with both petrol and diesel units, and there's the choice between fixed or flexible servicing regimes depending on whether your annual mileage is short or long. With the flexible programme, the need for your Kamiq to have an oil change, which will cost around £100, will occur anywhere between 9,300 and 18,600 miles, or up to every 2 years. It all depends on driving style. With the fixed programme, an oil change would be every 9,300 miles. Minor inspection services, which cost around £170, will initially be required after 2 years or 18,600 miles, and thereafter every year or 18,600 miles. Major services with an extended scope of inspection, which will cost around £280, will be required initially after 3 years or 18,600 miles, and thereafter every 2 years or 37,200 miles. There are, of course, various service plans available to help you spread your maintenance costs, and it's possible to add the fees for these into your monthly finance payments if you wish. The available Škoda Connect app has a proactive service element included, which, when activated, can send all the data needed from your car in advance to your local Škoda dealership prior to a service visit. What else? Well, your car will come with 3 years of pan-European roadside assistance that has no mileage restriction. The paintwork warranty lasts for 3 years, and as you'd expect, this model is protected by a 12-year anti-corrosion package. Finally, while it's certainly true that other rivals better the 3-year, 60,000 mile warranty that Škoda provides, you can extend your cover to 4 or 5 years by paying extra. Not that you really need to. The brand regularly tops independent consumer satisfaction surveys. According to real people, there are few more satisfying cars to own. Crossover SUVs like this one once morphed out of ordinary small hatchbacks. But are we now getting to the stage where the evolutionary process is reversing the other way? Well, take away the roof rails and the fractionally raised ride height, and this could just as easily be a new generation version of Škoda's Fabia Supermini, which of course in some ways this Kamiq is, a product of its time designed for the many supermini buyers defecting to the crossover segment. We can see clearly why that's happening, but before this test we were less clear why, amongst all the other options in this sector, customers of that sort should choose this Škoda. We're now clearer on that point. The lengthier version of the MQB A0 Volkswagen Group platform this Kamiq uses sets it apart from its Volkswagen T-Cross and Seat Arona sector stablemates. If you like the class-leading quality of those cars, but want it matched with the kind of interior space and practicality of, say, a Renault Captur, then this Kamiq could well be your ideal segment pick. For all that, we can't help feeling a touch disappointed here. Škoda's previous entrant in this sector, the old Yeti model, may have looked a bit dull, but it had a super flexible cabin, courtesy of a VarioFlex rear seat that could be slid about, reclined and even taken out completely. Plus, you could have an optional fold-flat front passenger seat for really long loads. The Kamiq hasn't carried forward any of these features and in truth isn't really youthful, quirky or different enough to properly target the most fashion-conscious buyers in this segment. In that respect, this represents something of a missed opportunity. Yet, for all that, we've no hesitation in fully recommending this car as a more capable proposition than its Volkswagen Group cousins. It's just as well built, slightly nicer inside, and thanks to its simply clever cabin features, just that bit easier to live with. In summary, this car lives up to its name, Kamiq being a moniker taken from the language of the Inuit people living in northern Canada and Greenland. Literally, it means something that fits perfectly in every situation, like a second skin. And here's a little SUV we could see you feeling just that way about. And while showy arrivals might apparently better suit your style, when it comes right down to it, this car might more readily suit your life.